in the president's orbit as well. We'll have the latest on all of that coming up. But we begin with breaking news about the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. The New York Times is reporting that despite concerns by intelligence officials and the White House's top lawyer, the president ordered his chief of staff to grant Jared Kushner a top-secret security clearance. It's something the president denied doing. It's something his daughter Ivanka is on record saying never happened. Maggie Haberman of the New York Times shares the byline on this. She joins us now on the phone. So, Maggie, can you just walk us through what exactly happened here based on your reporting?
Sure, Anderson. This has been going on for quite some time, as you know. Jared Kushner's background check has been a problem for him, and then by extension for the White House since he joined the administration. His initial application was lacking a bunch of key meetings and contacts that he had had with foreign officials in various capacities. They said there was a clerical error that was being updated. He was operating with a provisional clearance for some time. It was downgraded at least once, and it was downgraded in February of 2018 at a time when they were reviewing a bunch of security clearances. And this was very frustrating to Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump, both of whom, as we reported at the time, felt as if John Kelly and Don McGahn, the White House counsel, were targeting them. But the FBI and the CIA had flagged concerns about the extent of foreign contact by Jared Kushner and by his involved with his family business, the real estate business. By May, the president, the White House counsel had at that point written a memo expressing concerns about what was going on, and he had said that he did not think that there should be a clearance given, but the president ordered John Kelly to give one. And the reason we know this is John Kelly wrote that into a memo that he wrote to be filed at the White House.
The fact that John Kelly wrote a contemporaneous memo to be filed, what does that say? I mean, is that a normal thing to do?
I think that, look, what happens with personnel files and matters, I think is beyond my level of expertise. But I do know that writing contemporaneous memos and taking extensive notes about what is going on in interactions with Donald Trump has become something we've seen time and time again. There is a reason that Michael Cohen had tapes, or had a tape of himself and the president, in my estimation, from watching this over time. And it's because people have gotten used to the president saying that events that happened didn't happen. And so I think that John Kelly wanted documentation of how this was done. And this has become more of an issue, Anderson, because of the timing, because the Democratic-controlled House already was planning on looking at clearances, but also because at the time this clearance was granted, Abby Kushner, Jared Kushner's lawyer, went on television and said that, this was a standard process. This went through a normal route. When I asked the president in the Oval Office a few weeks ago if he had ordered people to give his son-in-law clearance, he said no, he didn't get involved and didn't even think he had that power. Ivanka Trump told ABC News that, her father didn't get involved. So he legally has the authority to do it, and it would frankly have raised fewer questions if they had all just said, yes, this is what happened.
Yeah, I mean, he point-blank denied having any interaction on Kushner's security clearance, and to your point, Ivanka Trump as well, in a television interview, said, it was a completely normal process.
Correct. And they painted this as a sort of standard operating procedure. I think Ivanka Trump's explanation to ABC was that there's many hundreds of thousands of clearances that are delayed through government, and that is true, but not at their level, not for assistance to the president, not, and in the West Wing, there is an ability to expedite clearances. And again, the president there is a universe in which the president could say, you know what, this is the person who I have assigned to deal with Mideast peace, to deal with a range of high-level foreign meetings. I want him to have a clearance. And then you're just doing it all up front. The fact that it involved so many versions of false statements publicly about this process is, of course, going to raise questions.
Yeah. Maggie Haberman, I appreciate the reporting. I want to show you something that we referenced earlier, or just now, Ivanka Trump a few weeks ago, talking about security clearances for her and her husband.
The president had no involvement pertaining to my clearance or my husband's clearance.
Okay. So it's not true, according to the New York Times. Joining me now is Philip Mudd, Laura Jarrett, Gloria Borger, Kirsten Powers, and David Urban. Phil, as somebody who has a security clearance here sitting at this table, what do you make of this?
Well,
is this normal?
For the moment, I'm waiting to wake up tomorrow morning. I do. I still have a top secret clearance. Let me make this really simple. I mean, the president threatened my clearance in August. He withdrew the clearance of John Brennan.
He threatened yours because of something you said.
Because something I said. So typically, in my experience, and I had a security clearance, I still do. I've now had it for 35 years. If you have a question about a security clearance, it's about what you did. Did you declare where you got money? Did you declare if you talked to a foreign official? John Brennan had his clearance withdrawn because of what he said. I had mine threatened about what I said. The question I have about Jared Kushner is not whether the president has the right to give him a clearance. He does. What was the problem? It wasn't what he said. Did he have money he didn't declare? Did he have people he contacted he didn't talk about? That's what can get a clearance withdrawn. That's what I think Jared Kushner didn't talk about. What was the problem?
Right. And I mean, Jared Kushner has had a web, obviously, of business interactions.
Sure.
You know, he had his father's company had a building that was in financial trouble that he was trying to get international money from Qatar and from other places.
Right.
We don't know if that's part of this.
Well, I think the whole issue, look, he submitted his security clearance form 4 times. The first time he submitted it, and Maggie was talking about this a little bit, we were told in our reporting it was a premature draft because he did not categorize or list any foreign contacts. We know his real estate business has lots of foreign investors. We know that Jared Kushner set himself up as the so-called back channel with Russia and other countries during the transition. None of this appeared on his form. Submitted it 4 times, and his attorney at the time said to us it was properly submitted, reviewed by career officials, and it was a normal process.
Right.
Today, he kind of had to say, wait a minute. A spokesman said, you know, at the time, we relied on the White House, basically, and they told us that it was handled in the regular process with no pressure from anyone, and they said, that was conveyed to you guys in the media at the time. News stories, if accurate, do not change what was affirmed at the time. In other words, it wasn't our fault. This is what we were told, and this is what we told you. And obviously now we know.
Right. I mean, this is the
so
position
much.
that Sarah Sanders has been in a number of times.
Exactly.
Saying something only to later say, well, you
right.
know, not saying it quite so succinctly as that.
Right.
Laura, I mean, the fact that Don McGahn and General Kelly felt moved to write this down and write about, and certainly Don McGahn's case, objections, shows you, I mean, it tells you something.
I think that's one of the more significant parts of the story. It is not as if there were some disgruntled career officials who wanted to be perhaps more conservative and say, oh, I see some issues here, you know, being more persnickety, perhaps, than McGahn and Kelly. But the fact that Trump's hand-picked White House counsel and chief of staff said, no, we have a problem here, and then Kelly went the extra step of deciding to memorialize it for whatever reason we don't know, and what exactly he said we don't know, but those show you that there were real concerns here. And to Phil's point, it's just kind of a vacuum about what were the issues that led the CIA to say, we still have questions here.
I mean, Kirsten, another argument is that, look, this is the person the president had picked to deal with Middle East peace, who had, you know, working with China, a whole host of issues. And if that's the person he wants, he is the president, he is allowed to do this.
Ideally, the president would listen to the people who are doing the security clearances if they raise a concern. This is one of the problems also with the president having a family member, I think, working for him, because I think if it was another person, maybe he would have dealt with it differently. Maybe not, because it's Donald Trump. But the point is, they raised serious concerns about this, and then you have, you know, I think, like, Ivanka and Jared might say, well, John Kelly didn't like them, and that's why he was doing it. I don't think they can really say that about Don McGahn, who's a pretty straight shooter by all accounts, and you have him saying that he doesn't think that he should have gotten this clearance. And so, you know, I think Phil has hit on it, like, what was the specific issue of why they didn't feel comfortable? Because it's actually not that common for a White House official to be denied a security clearance.
Yeah, but I want to get to David in just a second, but Phil, in your experience, have you ever heard of a president overruling intelligence officials, his White House counsel, to give somebody a security clearance?
I have not. I mean, I only spent 25 years, so I missed a few things. I've heard of pressure, for example, people saying this guy is a White House official, we should move forward expeditiously on this. I think the president had a right to say, hey, he's my guy in the Middle East, overrule this. I don't recollect ever hearing somebody say, the president says give somebody who has questions, where we have questions about his background, overrule that. I don't think so. I might be wrong.
David, should...
So a lot to unpack here, right? So as Phil knows, there's two different things being debated here as well. So there's a TS, a top secret, and there's an SCI. SCI is granted special compartmentalized information, which is handled by the CIA. The TS part's handled by the FBI. TS was granted. The SCI was not granted, still not granted. Phil knows this from doing, and I'd filled this out. I held the clearance before. You know, when you fill out the SF-86, it is not a small document.
No.
You have to go back and list. And as you correctly pointed out, Anderson, Jared's a guy with a vast web of international contacts, and you have to go through your Rolodex and every contact, whether you shook the guy's hand or the woman's hand, you had tea with somebody, to where you had an actual financial transaction, must be listed. And if it's not, you can't just simply update it. You have to file an amended SF-86. So there's a incredible sequence and dance that goes through here. And if you're like Phil, it's been doing this for 35 years, it's pretty easy because you started and then you just update it every year. Well, I met one person at a conference, I did this. When you have to go back for 15, 20 years and list it, it's a pretty daunting
But
task.
his first form was blank.
So assembling it is no mean feat, and that's not saying there's an excuse, but it is a little bit more in depth than people might understand. To Phil,
what does that have to do with the president overriding?
No, it's not. I'm just saying that explains some of the holes, why it wasn't done. It may have been not granted. I think there is no objection. The president should have said, listen, this Phil points out, this is my person who's doing Middle East peace. Right. I determine he's necessary for this job, and just say it.
But if it is, business connect. Look, he was meeting with Chinese companies trying to get a bailout for 666, the building in New York. He's the guy who's dealing with Qatar and Saudi Arabia and Middle East peace and China. If he is and his dad's company are in, searching for money, isn't that a conflict or a potential conflict?
Well, and that's what the unknowable point at this juncture, right? What is there? Is there money? Is there loans? Is there something outstanding that somebody has a lien on 666, right? That they're going to call if something doesn't go their way? That's just not. You can't know that at this point, right? And so and no one knows exactly. To Phil's point, how many of these clearances are done? You don't know how many times the president or people in the White House have said, hey, let's move this along. This person needs this clearance. I mean, I would think it happens more frequently than people may think.
Right. Yeah, but moving it along, again, this isn't even moving it along. This is, I'm not listening to you guys. I'm going to do this. And the White House counsel saying, like, this
again,
is...
I don't know what's in General Kelly's memo. It may have been a little bit of, we're leaving. I'm going to be gone at some point. I want to memorialize what transpired here. Same with Don McGahn. I don't necessarily ascribe a nefarious motive. Right. There's something in here that's so damning, maybe just simply factual.
Yeah. But also, what you're saying, this sort of excuse that you're making for him having to fill out all this paperwork, you're acting like no one else has ever filled out this paperwork. I mean, there are people much older than him with just...
You would also have to pay an attorney, which is expensive.
Yeah, that's true. I'm sure you can't afford that. But no, I mean, there are people, if you're getting a job doing international affairs, you typically have had a lot of contact with international people and transactions, and like I said, people who are much older and have much longer careers than him and managed to do this. So why is this so difficult?
But he had to amend it 4 times.
That's
my first one was blank,
because
they said mistakenly submitted, and then they continued to having to update and update and update. So the interim clearance went on for
and let's not forget, I believe the person who ran the security office was replaced. I believe the person who granted these clearances wasn't the person who originally began the clearance process as well.
Is it
Klein, I believe, Robert Klein.
Robert Klein.
Is it normal for people, I mean, I've never heard of, after talking to Kirsten, I don't run and memorialize what Kirsten said because I'm concerned that she's going to deny it the next day.
It's all on
I mean, does it say something to you that, you have Don McGahn and Chief of Staff memorializing stuff?
Yeah, of course. Listen, this is if you're talking about giving somebody as high profile, listen, I am certain that General Kelly and Don McGahn thought there's a possibility that someday the House may flip, the Senate may flip, and someone's going to wonder and ask questions about this. So I'm going to write it down and put it in the personnel file so that somebody can come and read it and understand for themselves.
But also, if you're Don...
Which the New York Times seems to have done.
Right, and there you go again. So, like, how do they get personnel records from the White House? How do they get memos that are maybe classified or otherwise.
But they disagreed. Isn't that why they did it?
We got to move on. There's so much going on tonight to tell you about. Up next, more breaking news on the long-anticipated Mueller report and whether it could actually be made public or not, which some Trump administration officials are actually now telling CNN. Plus, why the chief financial officer for the Trump organization could soon be grilled on Capitol Hill.
Anderson Cooper 3.
There's more breaking news to tell you about tonight, and this is about the long-awaited Mueller report. The big question, of course, is when Robert Mueller completes his investigation, what does the Attorney General, Bill Barr, do with the confidential report? CNN is now learning tonight that some administration officials we've spoken with believe that the way the special counsel regulations are written will protect the president from any negative information being released if he's not charged with a crime. CNN's Pamela Brown and Evan Perez join me now with details. What have you learned, Pamela?
Well, Anderson, I've spoken to several administration and White House officials. It includes that. And their view is that the special counsel regulations, as they are written, actually provide protection for President Trump. They say the plain language in the rules don't authorize or even contemplate a summary of the confidential report that Mueller will provide Barr to Congress. Now, obviously, if there's information already in indictments, it's already public, then that's not the issue in their view. But here's part of the rules that officials point to. This is what they're focused on. It says if you look at the rules, it simply says Barr is required to tell Congress when the special counsel probe ends and any requests the special counsel made that were denied. It also says the Attorney General can release that information to the public, but the language is ambiguous according to these officials, and that gives the president's team confidence that the confidential information in the report won't be made public. As one Trump administration official I spoke with tonight said, the public interest to release Mueller's confidential report cannot overcome the regulations, and in their view, the regulations do not require Barr to hand over the confidential report or anything from it.
Evan, the regulations, they believe, don't require it, but the law doesn't prohibit it either. Is that right?
The rules give the Attorney General a lot of discretion, and keep in mind that this means that the Attorney General could then follow the Justice Department's general rules about releasing information about people who aren't charged with crimes. We saw the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein discuss this issue just in the last week. He seemed to be laying the groundwork for none of this information becoming public. The president obviously cannot be charged with a crime under the Justice Department's guidelines. And it's interesting to note, Anderson, that during his confirmation hearings, the Attorney General, Bill Barr, was not asked about the release of any public information or any information to the public that could be used for impeachment proceedings, for instance. That never came up.
Stick around because I want to bring in NEAL, the person who actually drafted the special counsel regulations way back in 1999. NEAL, were you like 13 when you drafted them? I'm not sure how that's possible. But NEAL, what do you make of the White House using the regulations you drafted as a reason to give Congress and the American people as little information as possible?
Well, I'm just hearing this for the first time, Anderson, but boy, it sure seems like the Trump folks are reading the special counsel regulations the way they read the Constitution, which is to look for a loophole here and a loophole there. And it's not going to work. And if they try this and try and squelch the Barr and Mueller reports, I do think it'll be the end of the administration. And I say that for three reasons. Number one, it's totally inconsistent with the special counsel regulations, which are all about, at their heart, providing public confidence in the administration of the rule of law. There's even a provision we wrote in, make sure a president is not above the law. The remedy is impeachment, that Congress has to be able to do its function. And the only way, of course, for that to happen is for them to have all the information. So whether or not it's in the Barr report or not, Congress will just subpoena it, and they will get it no matter what. And then number three is the public. I mean, Nixon tried this. It didn't work out so well for him. And I suspect the Supreme Court would have the same result as they did back in 1974. Ultimately, the genius of our system is transparency and checks and balances, and hiding information about presidential wrongdoing. It's not going to work.
You said it would be the end of the administration. I want to ask you what you mean by that, because, I mean, during his confirmation hearing, William Barr said of the report that his goal, his quote, goal will be to provide as much transparency as I can consistent with the law. I mean, based on what Pamela and Evelyn are reporting, does it sound like Barr intends to live up to that goal?
Well, I sure hope, and I didn't take their reports to be sourced to Barr or something like that. I think Barr sounded a note of disclosure in his confirmation hearings. I'm sure the Trump administration, White House officials would like to take some of that back, but that is what Barr said. And when you read that language, Anderson, you just did that Barr said consistent with the law and regulations. There's nothing in the special counsel regulations, even under the most crazy overreading that the Trump administration can give it, that says that information is precluded from becoming public. And that was your question to Evan a moment ago. And that's exactly the right question. I mean, we can debate about whether it's 100% disclosure or 90% disclosure and the range of discretion in between, but nobody can debate that the regulations don't preclude disclosure. And when you're talking about something like this, high-level allegations of wrongdoing by the President of the United States, of course that information has to come out in some way or the other.
I know Pamela and Evan have some questions for you as well. Go ahead.
Hi, Neil. So obviously you wrote the regulations. What does it require in terms of the information that Barr should provide to Congress from the confidential report from Mueller, in your view? And can you point me specifically to the regulations and which section in that requires Barr to provide information from the confidential report?
So I'm just hearing all of this now, so I don't have the regulations in front of me, but it's either 600.8 or 600.9. I think it's 600.9, which requires a report. Yep. Which requires a report in 3 instances. One, when a special counsel is appointed, when a special counsel is removed, and at the conclusion of the investigation. And yes, the White House is right to say there we did specify if the Attorney General interfered with the investigation of the special counsel in any way, that triggered a specific report about that piece of what he did. But overall, in the commentary that was published alongside it, says the whole goal here is public confidence in the administration of justice, avoiding a cover-up, to put it simply. And if Barr did something like this, which I can't imagine he'd do, he obviously sounded a very different note at his hearings, it would not just be inconsistent with the regulations, it'd be consistent with the overall spirit of this country since the founding, since United States versus Nixon, the 1974 unanimous Supreme Court case, and the like. I can't imagine that he would do this. Again, I know the wishful thinking.
I don't see anything, as I'm looking at the regulations, that specifies or anything laid out saying that Barr must provide a summary of the confidential report.
So the regulations, again, say that at the conclusion he has to provide a report, and then the commentary to the regulations say that public confidence will require, in certain instances, that report even to be made public. And obviously this is the height of those concerns. This is not a special counsel appointed for, some, cousin of the president or something like that, which is, obviously something we contemplated the special counsel regulations being used for. But this is the heart of the most foundational question the American Republic faces, which is how do you investigate the chief executive, the President of the United States? And obviously that is the #1 case for public disclosure.
Evan?
Well, Neil, back when these regulations were drafted, obviously this was after the Ken Starr report and this idea that perhaps there was too much information that was being released as a result of that. Do you look back now and think that perhaps these regulations overcorrected and maybe that the way to fix this is for Congress to pass new rules that would require an Attorney General? This way, it's not up to his discretion what is released. Do you think you overcorrected when you wrote those rules?
Well, look, I think we're too early in the moment to figure that out. I would say this, if the President tried this or Barr tried this, I actually think it would backfire because a limited Barr report to Congress will just empower Congress to investigate through all of their committees, will empower the Southern District in New York and other federal prosecutors to investigate their current ones for the Trump Organization, campaign finance, and the like, and indeed state and even perhaps local investigations based on what Cohen said yesterday. So a limited report in many ways, and this is what I said in the New York Times last week, could be the worst of all worlds for Trump. It might get him a short-term bump, but in the long term, that is a very dangerous thing to be basically fomenting these other investigations because we can't trust the central one that's happening in Washington, D.C.
Neil Katyal, I appreciate your time and getting in here to comment on this. Pamela and Evan Perez as well. Thank you very much. Up next, there's breaking news about Michael Cohen's testimony today behind closed doors on Capitol Hill, and a House committee also wants to speak with Trump Organization CFO Alan Weisselberg. If you think Michael Cohen was close to President Trump over the years, Alan Weisselberg has been there from, well, with Donald Trump's father, the president's money man for decades. We'll talk about that ahead. More breaking news tonight. The House Intelligence Committee plans to bring in the man who knows all about the president's money, all about it. Tonight, we learned the committee is expected to call this man Alan Weisselberg. He's the chief financial officer of the Trump Organization, who also handled Trump's personal accounts. Weisselberg was granted immunity by prosecutors in the Southern District in New York in their investigation of Michael Cohen, the president's prison-bound former lawyer and fixer. The committee isn't done with Cohen either. He testified behind closed doors today. He's scheduled to return for more testimony next Wednesday, which will be exactly 2 months before he's scheduled to begin a 3-year prison sentence. Joining me now is a member of the House Intelligence Committee, Congressman Jim Himes, who Cohen appeared before today. Also Congressman Jerry Connolly, member of the Oversight Committee, who asked Cohen questions yesterday in that public hearing. Obviously, Congressman Himes, you cannot get into specifics. It's a closed-door hearing. How much of, was there information that Michael Cohen provided today that just, was it filling in blanks on things you already knew, or was it new avenues of things you didn't know, can you say?
I would say a little bit of both. I think he was more comfortable, and the proceedings were a lot less adversarial. There were no cameras running. Nobody had to score political points for the cameras. So there was both a lot of filling in of points. But yes, there was also new material that took me a little bit by surprise, and I don't mean to be cryptic or flirtatious about that, but enough so that one day of testimony was not enough, and he kindly agreed to come back for another day next Wednesday.
So he's coming back, what, because everyone didn't have a chance to ask him questions, or because there's so much information, there's just more information than
it's all of the above. Again, because we interviewed very differently than the open hearing. We had 1 hour per side, and as a consequence, we were really able to get into the details.
So when you say 1 hour per side, 1 hour for the Democrats, 1 hour for Republicans, and then back and forth?
45 minutes before, and that allowed us to get into the details in a way you just can't do.
So when it's behind closed doors, you know, obviously yesterday Republicans really didn't ask really hardly any questions. They just were pummeling him on trying to attack his credibility. They weren't actually asking questions about what he had actually said or about alleged crimes of the president, according to Michael Cohen. Do people make declarations, like when a Republican behind closed doors is asking questions, do they make a declaration? Do they go after his character, or is it specific questions?
No, again, when you see the transcript, and you will see the transcript, it was a lot more content-rich, but also boring. I mean, there weren't performances. My colleagues in the minority party, the Republicans, didn't do the sort of, public castigating of Michael Cohen that they did so much of yesterday. But it was a very, again, the chairman said this in his public statement today, it was a very, very fruitful hearing in which we learned a lot.
Congressman Connolly, who you spoke to in the hearing yesterday, we learned today from the chairman of your committee, the Oversight Committee, that Elijah Cummings, that he wants to have all of the people that Michael Cohen mentioned yesterday in testimony appear before the committee. Ivanka Trump was mentioned, Eric Trump, Donald Trump Jr., Alan Weisselberg. What do you want to hear from them?
Well, I hope we will tread carefully about hearing or compelling testimony from members of the family. I think the optics of that are very dangerous.
You think that could backfire?
I think
just
that
from
could
a
backfire.
PR standpoint.
And what we heard yesterday in open session, remember, was two of those people are subjects of a criminal probe that's ongoing by the Southern District of New York. It may be better to let that play out before we have them. But Mr. Weisselberg certainly is definitely in our sights. He's
Alan Weisselberg knows everything.
He knows everything. He's been there 40 years. He has the keys to the kingdom.
And would bringing him in, I mean, that would seem to cross just about every red line that the president has talked about in terms of family finances, charity finances, Trump Organization finances. But all of that is stuff you were interested in.
Yeah, that's, the president gets to set whatever line he wants. We don't have to respect it. I think, the bottom line we heard from yesterday that is maybe the most troubling is that the Trump organization is getting awfully close to, if it hasn't crossed the line, of being a criminal enterprise. That's really the bottom line testimony.
You believe that?
I absolutely believe that. And we already know that from other data. Don't forget the Trump Foundation and the Trump University.
Right.
And we had New York officials describe it as fraudulent and illegal activity. So that's not just Mr. Cohen's opinion. That's actually backed up by data from New York State.
Some people might not know much about Alan Weisselberg, but I just want to play some clips from yesterday, how often Alan Weisselberg was actually mentioned, because it's kind of illuminating us.
Weisselberg is Executive 1, correct?
Yes. The bottom signature, I believe, is Alan Weisselberg's. I was asked again with Alan Weisselberg. I was instructed by Alan. In the office with me was Alan Weisselberg. Mr. Weisselberg, for sure. Alan Weisselberg, Alan Weisselberg, Alan Weisselberg, Alan Weisselberg.
Who would know the answer to those questions?
Alan Weisselberg.
I don't know where Alan Weisselberg was yesterday, but if he was watching, I can only imagine him being like, oh, again? What are you kidding me with this? I mean, 40 years. Your committee now has called him. Is that correct?
I understand that to be true. We hadn't decided when we left, but certainly lots of people are reporting that.
Would that be a behind closed doors
I think that's a decision that hasn't been taken yet. Again, the chairman really wants to do as much of this as we can in the open. Now, as we discussed tonight, that has its downside. When cameras are on, people play to the cameras. But I know that the chairman wants to do as much of this as openly as we can, and so I think that's yet to be determined.
I know some of you folks have some questions.
I would like to just ask you, Congressman, obviously you're not going to tell us what went on behind closed doors, but having spent a day now with Michael Cohen, do you think his importance to you is more about his business dealings or about Russia and Russian collusion? Because yesterday, obviously, he said he didn't have direct evidence of collusion. So is it about business?
You asked sort of a jurisdictional question. Obviously, to the Intelligence Committee, the question about any Russian nexus, any international problem would be, relevant. The Judiciary and the Oversight Committees more so. But look, I come out of these 2 days with at least, I was tallying them up, 5 or 6 areas in which there is very credible evidence of crimes being committed. I mean, start with the check that was brought to Jerry's committee, a check that the president apparently signed in the White House to reimburse Michael Cohen for paying a woman hush money. Remember, it wasn't that long ago, mid-90s, a president was impeached for an inappropriate relationship in the White House and lying about it. Apparently, this president has lied about it, but the president who was impeached never wrote hush money checks in the White House. That's just the start. There's 4 or 5 other areas that I think are really legitimate questions about. Jerry used the word criminal enterprise. Exactly what this group of people is doing.
But what about Russia is what I'm asking about.
Well, that's of course what's interesting to my committee. We will, as you might imagine, continue to pursue hard exactly what happened around Trump Tower in Moscow.
Right.
Again, the full story hasn't been told there, and that doesn't mean I'm saying that there was clearly untoward activity, but everybody lied about it. Michael Cohen is going to jail for lying.
Can I also just add? It's not surprising that Cohen didn't really know much about Russia and collusion, because Trump's style, like a criminal enterprise, is to compartmentalize. So what you know is not what he knows, and that's deliberate. Only one person knows the whole story. So it's not at all surprising that there were gaps in Mr. Cohen's knowledge. That's by design.
Do you think the president pointed out that Michael Cohen said no collusion? He didn't actually say no collusion. He just said he had no direct evidence of it, though he had suspicions. Do you think the fact that he up front said he had no direct evidence actually adds to his credibility?
I think it does. And I think the president's statement today really undercut the entire Republican strategy yesterday, which was to try to discredit this witness.
Because he pointed out the...
Yeah, even Trump liked some of what he had to say and corroborated that must be true, because it's what I like.
But remember, too, the question of collusion is this imprecise term. Right. Remember what Michael Cohen said in Jerry's committee. He said he was on a conference call, and this obviously needs to be corroborated. He was in a conference call where Roger Stone said that WikiLeaks is going to release information. Now, that opens up a whole bunch of other lies. And then a few days later, the president goes on national TV and says, Russia, if you're listening. Again, a lawyer will determine whether that's conspiracy to defraud, but there is a case to be made that is evidence of the president knowing that something's about to happen that would benefit him on the part of WikiLeaks or the Russians and saying, do it, go ahead, please do it.
Publicly, in broad daylight.
I want to play what the president said today about Michael Cohen.
He lied a lot, but it was very interesting because he didn't lie about one thing. He said no collusion with the Russian hoax. And I said, I wonder why he didn't just lie about that too, like he did about everything else. I mean, he lied about so many different things, and I was actually impressed that he didn't say, well, I think there was collusion for this reason or that. He didn't say that. He said no collusion.
Laura?
You know, one of the things that Michael Cohen revealed yesterday that we hadn't heard before was the idea that the Southern District of New York is actually investigating the president for something beyond collusion, something that we have not heard anything about. Without telling us what he said behind closed doors, did he shed any more light today to your committee about what those might be, or provide you any glimpse into it?
Yeah, and you should ask Congressman Connolly that question as well, because I think there's been a lot of dancing around a number of subjects, and that has been the reason. You heard the chairman in his statement today after our meeting say that there were certain investigative equities in areas in which our witness didn't want to go. Other than that, he cooperated fully. So I think that's...
So even behind closed doors, he would not go down certain roads because of ongoing investigation.
I think it's fair to say that in both investigations, in both hearings, there were areas in which Mr. Cohen didn't want to go.
Did he give you any new names that we didn't hear yesterday?
Again, I don't want to get into the substance and facts of what was said. Yeah, the transcripts will be made public, and Phil?
Well, yeah, just one moment here. He did make reference to ongoing investigations into illegal activity, for example, in his response to Representative Ocasio-Cortez on illegal activity potentially related to taxes. I only have one question. I'm going to try to make it yes or no. Did you hear references to illegal activity that we did not hear yesterday? Potentially illegal activity.
In his hearing?
In my hearing?
Yes.
I know you wanted a yes or no answer to that question. Let me just say we learned new information that is not in the public realm.
All right. That's pretty good. That's close.
And Congressman, it's interesting. I mean, Michael Cohen yesterday said that he was called upon to intimidate, in phone calls, threaten lawsuits, some 500 times over the course of 10 years. I think I have to look at it again, but I think at some point, I think right after he was asked about physical intimidation, and he said no. I think he said there were other people for that.
Who did that? Donald Trump didn't do it personally. That's what he said.
Right.
And that was chilling.
But nobody. It was interesting to me. Nobody followed up on that because I'm curious. What exactly does he mean by that? Is he indicating actual physical intimidation, which is something that Stormy Daniels had alleged? There's no direct evidence of that. She had told some people around that time. But that's also something that it'd be interesting to hear Michael Cohen more on.
Absolutely.
I want to thank you both for being with us
having
on the
us,
panel as well. President Trump and Kim Jong-un disagree in Hanoi, and their second summit meeting ends abruptly. Just ahead, I'll talk it over with former Director of National Intelligence, General James Clapper, get his reaction to the president's defense of the North Korean leader over the death of American Otto Warmbier. And a quick programming note, the new CNN original series, The Bush Years, premieres this Sunday at 9 p.m. Eastern.